1 week later, the soldiers gathered again in the meeting hall. Word had spread about Commander Zekthor's story. More warriors came this time, wanting to hear about the humans. The room was packed with beings from across the galaxy. Zekthor walked to the front slowly. His old legs did not move as fast as they once did, but his memory was still sharp. Too sharp sometimes. He wished he could forget some of the things he had seen. "Last week I told you about New Houston," Zekthor began. "Tonight I will tell you about Epsilon Station. This is where I learned that human soldiers are even more dangerous than human colonists." The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear more. Epsilon Station was not a colony, Zekthor explained. It was a military base. A real military installation with trained soldiers. When our fleet arrived, we brought 3 warships and 4,000 troops. The station had only 600 people. Zekthor paused, remembering the confidence he had felt that day. "We thought it would be simple. Professional soldiers understand when a battle is lost. They know when to surrender. We sent them a message demanding that they give up. We expected them to negotiate." The commander's 3 eyes blinked slowly. Instead, their captain activated the station's self-destruct sequence. She gave her people 10 minutes to reach the escape pods. Then she sent us a message. Just 3 words. "Come and take it." A murmur went through the crowd. That was either very brave or very stupid. Her name was Captain Helen Grant, Zekthor continued. She was 38 years old. She had 2 children back on Earth, a husband who worked as a teacher. She had been in the military for many years. She knew exactly what she was doing. Zekthor explained that Grant was actually bluffing. The station's reactor could not really explode fast enough to harm the Kryn ships. But the Kryn did not know that. They panicked and rushed to stop the countdown. "We sent all our fighters," Zekthor said. "We launched boarding parties immediately. Everything focused on getting to that reactor and shutting it down before the station exploded." The old commander clicked his mandibles together, a sign of regret among his people. It was exactly what Grant wanted. While we scrambled to respond, her people were not running to escape pods. They were taking up defensive positions. They were preparing to fight. When our boarding parties entered the station, they walked right into a killing zone. Grant had divided her 600 personnel into 60 small teams. Each team knew the station perfectly. They had trained there for years. They controlled the life support systems, the gravity, even the lights. We would enter a hallway in normal gravity, Zekthor described. Then suddenly we would be floating in 0 gravity. The lights would go out. We could not see. Doors would slam shut, separating our forces. Then the humans would attack from the darkness. The Kryn had more soldiers and bigger weapons, but the humans had every advantage in that station. They knew every tunnel, every shortcut, every hiding place. Captain Grant herself led a team of 30 soldiers, Zekthor said. They held the central command area for 8 hours against 400 of our warriors. 8 hours. We kept sending more troops and they kept killing them. But that was not the strangest part, Zekthor told them. The strangest part was that Grant kept talking throughout the battle. Not to the Kryn, but to her own people. She broadcast on their internal communications, Zekthor explained. She gave orders, yes, but she also read poetry. Human poetry about standing strong, about choosing how you die. There was one poem called Invictus. It was written by a human hundreds of years ago. Zekthor had memorized some of the words even though he did not fully understand them. The poem talked about an unconquered soul, about being the master of your fate. Grant read this to her soldiers while they were dying, and somehow it made them fight harder. The battle lasted 16 hours. When it finally ended, the Kryn controlled the station. But the cost had been terrible. Only 112 humans survived to be captured. Captain Grant was not among the survivors. She rigged the command center with the last of her explosives, Zekthor said quietly. When we finally broke through, she detonated them. She killed herself and 60 of our soldiers in the explosion. The room was silent. Everyone was trying to imagine that level of commitment. The prisoners we took would not speak to us, Zekthor continued. They would not give us any information. We tried everything to make them talk. Nothing worked. One prisoner, a lieutenant named Frank Pierce, managed to kill himself and 2 of our guards. He used his own broken arm bone as a weapon. A Velkoth warrior made a gesture of confusion. Why such violence? What makes them fight like this? Zekthor had asked himself that question many times during the war. Years later, after the peace treaty was signed, I met a human historian. He said, I asked her to explain her species to me. She said humans do not just fight for land or resources. They fight for ideas, for each other, for the future they want their children to have. The historian had told Zekthor something else too, something that had stayed with him ever since. Captain Grant's daughter was 9 years old when her mother died. Zekthor said, the little girl sent a message to the Kryn High Command. She said that her mother loved her enough to fight us. She said when she grew up, she would love humanity enough to finish what her mother started. Zekthor looked around the room at all the young warriors. That child is now a major in the human fleet. She works in their diplomatic corps, helping to maintain the peace. But she still serves in the military. She has not forgotten what happened to her mother. None of them forget. The commander walked to a table where he had placed some items. He picked up a small device and activated it. An image appeared in the air showing a human woman in a military uniform. This is Helen Grant, Zekthor said. This picture was taken 1 week before the battle at Epsilon Station. She is smiling. She looks happy. This is what she looked like before she became a warrior who killed dozens of our soldiers. The image changed, showing Grant at her command post during the battle. Her face was hard and determined. She looked completely different. This is what we made her become, Zekthor said. We turned mothers and fathers, teachers and builders into warriors. And they were very good at it. He deactivated the image and looked at the assembled soldiers. Epsilon Station taught us an important lesson. It taught us that human soldiers are not like other species soldiers. They do not fight just because they are ordered to. They fight because they believe in what they are protecting, and that makes them incredibly dangerous. Elder Vrick stood up and joined Zekthor at the front. The commander speaks an important truth, Vrick said. I was involved in the intelligence analysis during the war. After Epsilon Station, we studied every piece of data we could find about human military history. What we learned was disturbing. Vrix explained that humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years. They had fought each other, testing and refining their tactics. They had developed strategies for every situation. They understood warfare in ways that species who had only fought for territory or resources did not. They have phrases for it, Vrick said. Fighting to the last man. No surrender. Death before dishonor. These are not just words to them. They mean it. Zekthor nodded in agreement. After Epsilon Station, the Kryn High Command began to reconsider the war. He said, we could win battles, but at what cost? Every station would be like Epsilon. Every colony would be like New Houston. The humans would make us pay in blood for every meter of ground. The old commander sat down, suddenly tired. Next week I will tell you about the Proxima campaign, he said, about Admiral Linda Hayes and the battle that finally convinced us to seek peace, about the day we realized that winning the war would cost us everything we valued. As the soldiers filed out of the hall, they talked in hushed voices. The story of Captain Grant and Epsilon Station had shaken them. They looked at the peaceful night sky differently now, knowing what humanity was capable of if provoked. Zekthor remained behind, as he had the week before. He thought about Helen Grant and her daughter, about Frank Pierce and all the others who had died at Epsilon Station, about the terrible waste of war, but he also thought about the peace that had followed, the trade agreements and cultural exchanges, the fact that Grant's daughter now worked to prevent wars instead of fighting them. Perhaps all those deaths had not been completely meaningless. Perhaps they had taught both species something valuable. The commander hoped so. He truly hoped so. The meeting hall was quiet and dark. Commander Zekthor sat in his chair, waiting for the ceremony to begin. His hard shell clicked softly as he moved. Around him, soldiers from many different alien species gathered together. They came here once every month to remember the wars they had fought. The air smelled strange. Each type of incense represented a different world where battles had taken place. Zekthor had lived for many years and fought in many wars. But one war still haunted his dreams. The war against humanity. Elder Vrick stood up at the front of the room. He had 4 arms and came from a planet called Skelios. He was old and wise and everyone respected him. Tonight we remember the 3rd expansion wars, Vrick said in a loud voice. Commander Zekthor wants to share his story. He fought against the humans. The room became very quiet. Even after 5 years of peace, the word human made everyone nervous. Zekthor stood up slowly. His 3 eyes looked around at all the young soldiers who had come to listen. I will tell you what I saw, Zekthor said. His voice came out as clicks and whistles, but a machine translated his words so everyone could understand. I tell you this not because I am proud of war. I tell you so you know why we must never fight the humans again." The young soldiers moved closer. They had heard stories about humans, but Zekthor had actually been there. He had seen them fight with his own eyes. "It started in a place called the Arcturus sector," Zekthor began. "We looked at the humans and thought they were weak. They had no hard shells to protect them. They had no poison or venom. They were not very strong. They did not live very long. Our commander said we could beat them in 3 months. Zekthor stopped talking for a moment. His mouth parts moved as he remembered. "We were very wrong," he said quietly. The old commander walked to the center of the room. He wanted everyone to see his face as he told his story. "The humans looked weak on the outside," Zekthor continued, "but inside they had something we did not understand. Something that made them dangerous." A young soldier raised his hand. "What was it, Commander?" "Stubbornness," Zekthor answered. "The humans simply refused to give up. No matter how bad things looked, they kept fighting. They fought when any reasonable species would have surrendered." Zekthor began to tell them about the first real battle. It happened on a moon called New Houston. Only 50,000 humans lived there. It was a small colony that dug minerals from the ground. "I led 20,000 Kryn warriors," Zekthor said. "We had big ships in space that could shoot down at the colony. We had control of the sky. The humans had maybe 3,000 soldiers. We thought it would be easy." The attack began when the sun came up. The Kryn forces moved forward with their weapons ready. The human soldiers fell back, moving to buildings they had prepared for defense. "We pushed forward all day," Zekthor remembered. "We took some losses, but we kept advancing. By the time the sun went down, we thought we had almost won. Then night came." The commander's voice became softer, almost a whisper. "That is when everything changed. The humans did not rest at night like we did. Small groups of them attacked us in the darkness. They moved so quietly and so carefully. Our sensors could see their heat, but they were too fast. They would attack us, then disappear. Then they would attack from somewhere else." Zekthor told them about a human named Jake Morrison. He was only 23 years old. Before the war, he had built houses for people to live in. When the Kryn invaded, he picked up a gun and became a soldier. This Morrison and 4 other humans destroyed 17 of our armored vehicles in just one night, Zekthor said. They used explosives they made from mining equipment. When we finally trapped them in a building, they fought with their guns until they had no bullets left. Then they used knives. Then they used their bare hands. The alien soldiers listening to the story looked shocked. They could not imagine fighting like that. Morrison took 14 shots from our plasma weapons before he finally died. Zekthor continued. His friends kept fighting even after they were badly wounded. We did not understand why. Why not just give up? Why choose to die? Elder Vrick spoke up. Perhaps it was their sense of honor. Zekthor shook his head, all 3 eyes blinking slowly. No, it was worse than that. They were buying time. While they fought us, the regular people, the families and children, were escaping through tunnels under the ground. Tunnels we did not know about. Every second those 5 humans fought, more people got away to safety. They knew they would die. They accepted it. They calculated that their deaths were worth it if others lived. The room was completely silent now. Every soldier was thinking about what that meant. The battle for New Houston lasted 6 weeks, Zekthor said. Not 6 hours like we planned. 6 weeks. We had to fight for every street. Every building was a trap. The humans put explosives in their own buildings. They poisoned water supplies they knew we would capture. They sent false messages to trick us into walking into ambushes. Zekthor's voice grew harder as he spoke. By the time we finally captured the colony, we had lost 8,000 soldiers. 8,000. The humans evacuated 47,000 civilians through those tunnels. Their 3,000 soldiers killed nearly 3 times their own number of us before they were defeated. A young Skelian warrior raised one of his tentacles. Surely that was as bad as it got, Commander. Those were just desperate colonists, not real soldiers. Zekthor looked at the young warrior. If he could have smiled, he would have. But not from happiness, from the bitter memory of what came next. I wish that were true, Zekthor said. New Houston was just the beginning. Just the first lesson. The humans kept teaching us new lessons, and each one was harder than the last. Wait until I tell you about Captain Helen Grant and what she did at Epsilon Station. The commander sat back down. His body was tired from standing and from remembering. The memories of those battles were still fresh in his mind, even after all these years. He could still see the faces of the humans he had fought, still hear their voices shouting defiance even as they died. "That is enough for tonight," Elder Vrick said. "Commander Zekthor will continue his story at our next gathering. We must all think carefully about what we have heard." As the soldiers left the hall, they talked quietly among themselves. They had heard the numbers. 8,000 Kryn dead to take one small colony. If that was just colonists and workers fighting with simple weapons, what would real human soldiers be like? Zekthor remained in his seat after everyone left. He looked at the memorial wall where names of dead soldiers were carved. So many names. From both sides. The price of that war had been terrible. And this was only the first part of his story. The rest was even worse, but it was important to tell. The young needed to understand. They needed to know what happened when someone tried to conquer humanity. Maybe then they would work to keep the peace. Maybe then the names on that wall would mean something. The old commander finally stood and walked toward the door. Tomorrow he would rest. Next week he would tell them about Helen Grant, about Epsilon Station, about the day he learned that human soldiers were even more dangerous than human colonists. Outside, the night was peaceful. Ships moved across the sky, carrying goods between the different species. Trade missions and cultural exchanges. Peace, hard-won and precious peace. Zekthor looked up at the stars and hoped it would last. The fourth week arrived, and the meeting hall could barely hold everyone who wanted to attend. Word of Commander Zekthor's stories had spread beyond the station. Soldiers and diplomats from across the galaxy came to hear the final parts of his tale about the human war. Zekthor walked slowly to the front. He felt the weight of all those eyes watching him. These were not just stories to entertain people. They were lessons bought with blood and pain. Lessons that must not be forgotten. "Tonight I will tell you about the peace," Zekthor began. "About what I learned when the fighting stopped and we had to learn to live with the humans as neighbors instead of enemies." The crowd settled in to listen. They had heard about the battles. Now they would hear about what came after. The peace negotiations took a full year, Zekthor explained. Both sides were cautious. Both sides had lost so much. The meetings were held on a neutral space station, far from both our territories. Zekthor described the first time he saw humans in person without trying to kill them. It was strange and uncomfortable. These were the beings who had cost him so many soldiers, so many friends. Now he had to sit across a table from them and talk. The human delegation was led by Ambassador Patricia Lopez, Zekthor said. She was a career diplomat, very skilled at negotiations, but she had also lost her son in the war. He had been a pilot killed at Proxima. The old commander's voice grew quiet. "I expected her to hate us, to want revenge. Instead, she wanted peace. She said her son had died so that others could live. She said the best way to honor his memory was to make sure no more sons and daughters died in this war." The negotiations were difficult. Both sides had demands. Both sides had grievances. But slowly, carefully, they built an agreement. The Treaty of Terra established clear boundaries, Zekthor explained. Human space and Kryn space were separated. Neither side would enter the other's territory without permission. Trade would be allowed but carefully regulated at first. But the treaty was more than just lines on a map. It was a recognition that both species had the right to exist and grow in their own way. The humans did not demand reparations, Zekthor said. They did not ask us to pay for the damage we had caused. They only asked for one thing: recognition that humanity would chart its own path among the stars. That we would respect their sovereignty and their choices. A young Kryn soldier raised a claw. Did we not win battles? Should we not have demanded more? Zekthor looked at the young warrior with his three eyes. We won battles, yes, but we did not win the war. And the humans knew something important. They knew that a peace built on humiliation would not last. They wanted a peace that could endure. So they asked only for respect, not revenge. After the treaty was signed, something unexpected happened. Both sides began to actually communicate. Cultural exchanges were organized. Scientists began to work together. Artists shared their creations. I volunteered to be part of the first exchange program, Zekthor said. I spent 6 months living on Earth in a city called Seattle. I wanted to understand these beings who had fought us so fiercely. The old commander described his time among humans. He lived in a small apartment, shopped in their markets, walked in their parks. He watched them go about their daily lives. What I learned surprised me, Zekthor said. The humans I met were not warriors. They were teachers, doctors, engineers, artists. They had families and friends. They laughed and cried. They worried about their children and their future. One human in particular had made an impression on Zekthor. Her name was Margaret Cole. She had been a doctor on New Houston during the invasion. I met her by accident, Zekthor explained. I was at a medical conference and she was giving a presentation. When she learned I had been at New Houston, she asked to speak with me privately. Zekthor had been nervous about that meeting. He did not know what she would say or do. But Margaret Cole surprised him. She told me her story, Zekthor said. She had stayed behind at the hospital with 12 patients who were too sick to evacuate. We captured her. We interrogated her, trying to learn about the resistance. She told us nothing. The old commander's voice filled with shame. We were not gentle with her. We used methods that I am not proud of. But she never revealed anything about the tunnel networks or the evacuation routes. Every minute she resisted was another minute for her people to escape. Margaret Cole had survived the war. She had returned to being a doctor. When Zekthor met her years later, he expected her to be angry, to hate him and all Kryn. Instead, she said something I will never forget. Zekthor continued. She said, I forgive you, but never forget why we fought. Not for conquest, not for glory. Because we will defend our right to exist, our right to choose our own path, with everything we have and everything we are. Remember that, and we will never be enemies again. Those words had changed how Zekthor saw everything. The humans did not hate the Kryn. They just refused to be conquered. There was a difference. During my time on Earth, I also met the families of soldiers I had fought against, Zekthor said. Jake Morrison's parents, the husband of Captain Helen Grant, the sister of Sergeant Danny Cooper. Each meeting had been difficult in its own way, but each one had taught Zekthor something important about humanity. Morrison's parents showed me pictures of their son as a child, Zekthor said. They told me stories about him. How he loved to build things, how he always helped his neighbors, how he had wanted to design buildings after the war ended. The old commander paused, overcome by emotion. They did not blame me for his death. They said he made his own choice. He chose to fight so others could live. They said they were proud of him, even though they missed him every day. Captain Grant's husband had been the hardest meeting. His wife had died at Epsilon Station, and he was raising their 2 daughters alone. He told me that Helen had sent him a message before the final battle, Zekthor said. She told him she loved him and the girls more than anything. She told him to teach their daughters to be strong, to be brave, but also to be kind. She said the galaxy needed kindness as much as it needed courage. Danny Cooper's sister had been young, just 15 when her brother died. She was 20 now, studying to be an engineer. She said Danny used to play music for her, Zekthor explained. He wanted to compose symphonies after his military service ended. She played one of his recordings for me. It was beautiful. A piece he had written called Hope for Tomorrow. These meetings had broken something inside Zekthor. Not in a bad way, but in a way that let new understanding grow. He finally saw humans not as enemies, but as people. People with dreams and families and futures that had been disrupted by war. I spent 6 months on Earth, Zekthor said to the assembled soldiers. When I left, I understood something crucial. The humans who fought us were not professional killers. They were ordinary people forced into extraordinary circumstances. They fought because they had to, not because they wanted to. Elder Vrick stood and joined Zekthor again. The commander's experience mirrors what many of us learned after the war, Vrick said. Humans are not monsters. They are not bloodthirsty warriors. They are beings much like ourselves with the same hopes and fears, but they have one quality that makes them unique. The old Skelian looked around the room. When threatened, humans transform. They become utterly dedicated to survival. Every human becomes a soldier. Every human becomes willing to sacrifice. This is not because they love war. It is because they love peace enough to fight for it. Zekthor nodded in agreement. The treaty is held for 5 years now, he said. Trade between our peoples grows every year. Human students attend our universities. Kryn scientists work in human laboratories. We are not friends yet, perhaps, but we are no longer enemies. The old commander looked tired but satisfied. Next week I will tell you the final part of my story, he said. The lessons we must carry forward. The truths we must never forget. Because memory is what keeps the peace alive. As the crowd dispersed that night, many stayed behind to talk. They discussed what they had heard, trying to understand the complexity of it all. War and peace, enemies and neighbors, hatred and forgiveness. Zekthor stood at the memorial wall as had become his custom. He touched the names carved there, remembering each battle, each loss. But now he also remembered the humans he had met after the war. The families who had forgiven, the doctor who had survived, the music a dead pilot had left behind. War was simple. Peace was complicated, but complicated was better. The meeting hall was full again. Even more soldiers had come this week. Stories about Commander Zekthor's experiences with the humans had spread across the station. Warriors from distant systems had traveled to hear him speak. Zekthor stood at the front of the room. His 3 eyes surveyed the crowd. He saw young faces, eager and curious. They had not lived through the war. They did not understand what humanity truly meant. "Tonight I will tell you about the Proxima campaign," Zekthor began. "This is the battle that changed everything. The battle that made us realize we could not win this war, not in any way that mattered." The room fell completely silent. The war had been going on for 3 years. Zekthor explained. "We had won many battles, but each victory cost us more than the last. The humans kept learning. They adapted to our tactics. They found our weaknesses and exploited them." Zekthor described how he had been promoted to fleet commander after Epsilon Station. His new assignment was to attack the Proxima system, where humans had built major industrial centers. The plan was to destroy their ability to make weapons and ships. "We brought 12 warships," Zekthor said. "The humans had only 4 vessels defending the system. The numbers were clearly in our favor. We expected to win easily. But the human commander was Admiral Linda Hayes. She had served in their navy for 40 years. She had survived 3 other wars and dozens of battles. She was old, experienced, and very clever. Her flagship was called the Defiance," Zekthor continued. "It was 30 years old. Our ships were newer and had better weapons. Any 2 of our warships could have destroyed her ship in a fair fight." The old commander clicked his mandibles. "But Admiral Hayes did not give us a fair fight. She never intended to. She divided her 4 ships, making us split our fleet to chase them. While we pursued her vessels, her fighter craft attacked our supply ships. The humans are very good at this type of warfare. They call it asymmetric tactics." Zekthor explained that Hayes kept her forces moving, never staying in one place long enough for the Kryn to trap her. She hit them where they were weak and avoided places where they were strong. It was frustrating and costly. But the real turning point was not a battle, Zekthor said. It was a message. Admiral Hayes sent a transmission to our entire fleet. Not a threat. Not a demand. An explanation. Hayes told the Kryn about the name of her ship. She explained what the word defiance meant to humans. Then she told them about human history, about battles where humans had faced impossible odds and fought anyway. She listed places with strange names, Zekthor recalled. Thermopylae, Alamo, Bastonia. Places where humans should have run away but chose to stand and fight. Sometimes they won. Sometimes they died. But they never surrendered. Admiral Hayes explained that humans did not fight because they could not understand mathematics or odds. They fought because they could choose to fight and because surrender meant accepting a future they refused to accept. Then she made us an offer, Zekthor said quietly. She told us to leave Proxima. If we left, she would let us go without attacking. But if we stayed, every human in the system would fight until only corpses remained on both sides. She promised this was not a bluff. To prove her point, Hayes showed the Kryn recordings from previous battles. New Houston, Epsilon Station, 30 other conflicts. The recordings showed humans fighting to the last person, fighting with broken weapons, fighting with their bare hands. Our admiral at that time was named Vex Kal the Unyielding, Zekthor said. He was proud and stubborn. He did not believe human words. He thought Hayes was trying to scare us. So he chose to stay and fight. The old commander's voice grew heavy with sadness. It was a terrible mistake. The battle for Proxima lasted 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting. Admiral Hayes lost 3 of her 4 ships, including the Defiance. The Kryn lost 8 of their 12 warships. Both admirals died in the fighting, Zekthor said. But before Admiral Hayes died, she gave one final order. She launched every remaining fighter and shuttle at our flagship, not to attack with weapons. She ordered them to ram us, to use their ships as missiles. The room was completely silent. Everyone was imagining what that meant. Every pilot chose to die, Zekthor continued. They flew their ships at full speed into our vessels. The last one to hit us was piloted by Sergeant Danny Cooper. He was 19 years old. Just a boy, really. Zekthor's voice cracked as he spoke the next part. Our sensors recorded his ship's cockpit. We saw his face on the screen as he accelerated toward us. He was smiling. A child smiling as he flew to his death. Because he believed it mattered. Because he thought his death would help protect his people. The old commander had to stop talking for a moment. Even after all these years, that image haunted him. That young face smiling. After Proxima, everything changed, Zekthor said. The Kryn High Command held emergency meetings. We had won the battle, technically. We controlled the system. But at what cost? We lost 2/3 of our fleet. And for what? The humans had evacuated most of their people and equipment before the final battle. Elder Vrix stood and joined Zekthor at the front of the room. I was part of the strategic planning committee, Vrix said. After Proxima, we analyzed the situation carefully. We realized that we could eventually win the war. We had more ships, more soldiers, more resources than humanity. The old Skelian paused, letting his words sink in. But the cost would destroy us. Every system would be another Proxima. Every planet would demand rivers of blood. We would have to kill every single human in existence because as long as one survived, they would keep fighting. And even if we succeeded, what would be left of the Kryn? How many of our own people would die? Zekthor nodded in agreement. We also realized something else, he added. Even if we killed every human, their children would remember. Their descendants would search the galaxy for us, seeking revenge. The hatred would never end. The cycle of violence would continue forever. The commander looked around the room at all the young soldiers. So 6 months after Proxima, we began peace negotiations. It took another year to finish them. The result was the Treaty of Terra. Zekthor explained what the treaty meant. Boundaries were established. Trade agreements were made. Both species agreed never to attack each other again. The treaty is not just words on paper, Zekthor said. It is a recognition of reality. We recognized that humanity would chart its own course among the stars. They recognized that the Kryn and other species deserved the same respect. A young warrior raised a tentacle. But Commander, if we could have won eventually, why did we give up? Zekthor looked at the young soldier for a long moment. Because victory would have been meaningless, he answered. What good is controlling territory if your people are dead? What value is there in defeating an enemy if the cost destroys everything you hold dear? War is not just about winning. It is about what you are willing to pay for that victory. The old commander walked to the memorial wall where names of the fallen were carved. These names represent the price we paid, he said, touching the wall gently. Thousands of Kryn warriors who died fighting humans. And for what? In the end, we made peace anyway. Perhaps we should have made peace in the beginning and saved all these lives. Elder Vrix spoke again. The commander is right. War should always be the last option, used only when there is no other choice. And before you start a war, you must understand your enemy. We did not understand humanity. We thought they were weak. We learned otherwise. Zekthor turned back to face the assembled soldiers. Next week I will tell you the final part of my story, he said. I will tell you what I learned after the war ended. About meeting humans in peace instead of war. About understanding why they fight the way they do. As the soldiers left that night, they were quieter than before. The story of Proxima had shaken them deeply. The image of young Danny Cooper smiling as he died would stay with many of them forever. Zekthor remained in the hall alone. He thought about Admiral Hayes and her final stand. About Cooper and all the other pilots who had chosen to become missiles. About the terrible waste and the hard-won peace that followed. Tomorrow he would rest. Next week he would finish his story. The 5th week arrived and the meeting hall was packed beyond capacity. Many stood along the walls because there were no seats left. Everyone knew this was the final chapter of Commander Zekthor's story. They wanted to hear how it ended. Zekthor stood at the front of the room looking older and more tired than he had in previous weeks. Telling these stories had taken a toll on him. Remembering was painful, but it was necessary. Tonight I will tell you the lessons, Zekthor began. The truths we learned from fighting humanity. The wisdom bought with blood that we must never forget. The room was completely silent. Even those standing along the walls did not move. The first lesson is simple but important, Zekthor said. Never underestimate an opponent because they look weak. The humans had no armor, no claws, no venom. They looked fragile. We thought they would be easy to defeat. We were very wrong. The old commander explained that strength came in many forms. Humans made up for their physical weakness with intelligence, determination, and technology. They built weapons to replace the claws they did not have, Zekthor said. They created armor to protect their soft bodies. They used their minds to compensate for their physical limitations. In some ways, this made them more dangerous than species with natural weapons. The second lesson, Zekthor explained, was about adaptability. Humans learn incredibly fast, he said. In the beginning of the war, we won battles easily, but each time we defeated them, they studied what we did. They learned our tactics. They found our weaknesses. By the end of the war, they were predicting our moves before we made them. This ability to learn and adapt was something the Kryn had never encountered before. Most species had fixed ways of fighting that changed slowly over generations. Humans changed their tactics battle by battle, sometimes even during a single fight. The third lesson is about unity, Zekthor continued. When humans are threatened, they put aside their differences. On their own world, they have many nations, many cultures, many disagreements. But when we attacked, they became one people. Every human fought for every other human. The old commander had seen this unity firsthand. Human soldiers from different countries speaking different languages, fighting side by side without hesitation. This unity extended beyond their soldiers, Zekthor said. Civilians supported the military. Scientists developed new weapons. Engineers built defenses. Artists created propaganda to maintain morale. Everyone contributed in their own way. The entire species became a war machine. But perhaps the most important lesson, Zekthor explained, was about knowing when to stop fighting. We could have continued the war, he said. Eventually, we might have won. We had more resources, more ships, more soldiers, but victory would have cost us everything. We would have had to destroy every human world, kill every human, eliminate them completely, because they would never surrender. The old commander's voice grew heavy. And even if we succeeded, what would we have gained? Control of dead worlds, mountains of corpses, the hatred of every other species in the galaxy who would wonder if they were next. Victory would have been meaningless. Elder Vrick stood and joined Zekthor as he had done each week. The commander speaks profound truth, Vrick said. War is not about winning. It is about achieving objectives that matter. Our objective in fighting humanity was to expand our territory and gain resources. But the cost of achieving this objective became greater than any possible benefit. The old Skelian diplomat gestured to the assembled soldiers. This is why the Treaty of Terra is so important, Vrix continued. It recognizes that both species have the right to exist and prosper. It establishes boundaries and rules that allow us to coexist. It chooses peace over continued conflict. Zekthor nodded in agreement and then shared something personal. 5 years ago, I would have said the treaty was a defeat, he admitted. I was angry that we made peace instead of continuing to fight. But now, after spending time with humans, after understanding them, I know the treaty was our greatest victory. The old commander explained that true victory was not about conquering others. It was about ensuring the survival and prosperity of your own people. The treaty allows both species to grow and develop, Zekthor said. Kryn worlds are safer now than during the war. Our economy is stronger because we trade with humans. Our science advances faster because we share knowledge with them. The peace has given us more than war ever could. A young warrior stood up, gathering courage to ask a question. Commander, you say we should not fight humans again, but what if they attack us? What if the peace fails? Zekthor looked at the young soldier with all 3 eyes. If humans attack us without cause, then yes, we would fight, he said. But I do not believe that will happen. The humans want peace as much as we do. They are building their civilization, raising their children, pursuing their dreams. They have no desire to conquer us. The old commander's voice grew firmer. But if somehow we are foolish enough to attack them again, if we break the treaty and invade their space, then we will learn the lessons of this war all over again, and the cost will be even higher because now they know how to fight us. Zekthor walked to the memorial wall where the names of fallen warriors were carved. He touched the cold stone gently. Every name here represents a lesson learned, he said. Jake Morrison taught us that even untrained colonists can be deadly fighters when defending their homes. Helen Grant showed us that human soldiers will die before surrendering. Danny Cooper proved that humans will sacrifice themselves for their beliefs. The old commander turned back to face the crowd. But there are other names that should be remembered too. Margaret Cole, who forgave her torturers. Patricia Lopez, who negotiated peace even though she had lost her son, all the human families who chose to move forward instead of seeking revenge. Zekthor's voice filled with emotion. These names teach us that humans are more than warriors. They have the capacity for great violence, yes, but they also have the capacity for great compassion. They can forgive terrible wrongs. They can build instead of destroy. They can choose peace even when war would be emotionally satisfying. Elder Vrick spoke again, his voice carrying authority. The lessons Commander Zekthor shares are now part of the official record of this hall, he said. Every soldier who comes here will learn about the human war. They will understand what happened and why. This knowledge will help prevent future conflicts. The old Skelian looked around the room. But knowledge alone is not enough. Vrix continued. We must also maintain contact with humanity. We must continue the cultural exchanges, the trade agreements, the diplomatic relationships. Peace is not something you achieve once and forget about. Peace is something you build every day. Zekthor agreed completely. This is why I tell these stories, he said. Not to glorify war, but to prevent it. Young soldiers need to understand what their elders learned. They need to know that some battles are not worth fighting, no matter how strong you are. The old commander's voice grew softer but more intense. If you remember nothing else from my stories, remember this. Humans are not invincible. They can be killed. They can lose battles, but they cannot be conquered because they will never stop fighting. Never. They will fight for generations if necessary. They will turn every world into a fortress, every city into a battlefield, every citizen into a soldier. Zekthor paused, letting his words sink in. This is not weakness, he said. This is the opposite of weakness. This is a strength of will that defies logic and reason, and it is the single most dangerous quality any species can possess. The old commander looked tired but satisfied. My story is finished, he said. I have told you what I saw, what I learned, what I understand now that I did not understand then. I hope these lessons stay with you. I hope they guide your decisions in the future. As Zekthor prepared to sit down, a young human in the uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps stood up in the back of the room. She walked forward slowly. Her name tag read Lieutenant Helen Grant. Commander Zekthor, she said clearly. I am the daughter of Captain Helen Grant, who died at Epsilon Station. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. I wanted to thank you, the young woman continued, for remembering my mother's story, for telling the truth about what happened, for working toward peace. Zekthor made a gesture of deep respect. Your mother was a worthy opponent, he said. Her courage and dedication were remarkable. I honor her memory. Lieutenant Grant smiled, though tears shone in her eyes. She would have appreciated that, the young human said. She always believed that former enemies could become friends if both sides were willing to try. I work in the diplomatic corps now, trying to make that belief real, trying to build something lasting from the peace our parents created. Zekthor felt something shift inside him. This was why the stories mattered. This was why remembering was important, so that the children of warriors could become builders of peace. Your mother fought so you could do exactly what you are doing, Zekthor said. She would be very proud. After Lieutenant Grant left, after all the soldiers had filed out of the hall, Zekthor stood alone in the quiet room. He had told his story. He had shared the lessons. Now it was up to the younger generation to carry those lessons forward. The old commander touched the memorial wall one last time.